hello, everyone. Thanks so much for bearing with us. I have a notorious background of being somewhat tech unsavvy. So here we are. We made it a few minutes behind, but a lot of spirit nonetheless. So we are so excited for this event today. This is going to be a power pack session. You are going to walk away with some really tactical, good stuff that you can take with you into your prospecting and your messaging literally right away. Maybe right after this event, you'll change the way that you do your cold emails. So I'm so excited about this. I wanted to just first and foremost introduce Women in Sales. So for those of you who don't know us, we are a community focused on elevating women within the sales profession. So we have a Slack community, we have a great presence on LinkedIn, and we have the great pleasure of partnering with incredible organizations, one of which happens to be Lavender. So I'm going to let Will and Jen introduce themselves, and then I will put the onus on one of you two to also introduce Lavender. So if people don't know who Lavender is, then they can.
Well, I'm going to go first so Will can introduce Lavender.
I see it. You jumped for it. I was going to put you on the spot.
I knew you were, and that's why I got ahead of it. So my name is Jen Allen. It's so great to be here. Thanks for having us. I am over community growth at Lavender, which is part of our marketing organization. I've spent my entire career selling to salespeople. I've lived through many of the mistakes we're going to talk about, and just really excited for the topic today.
Yeah, I'm Will Allred, one of the co-founders at Lavender. I think my official title is COO, but that just means I do a lot of different things, including fun events like this, where I get to share some of the awesome data that's going through our system. So Lavender is a Chrome extension used by over 20,000 sellers. We're helping folks improve their response rates, across we've almost analyzed 100 million emails at this point. The average response rate for our users is 20.5%. So yeah, it is possible for cold email to be effective and work. And so with that, today I'm pretty excited for us to jump in and talk about some messaging, some of the data points that we have, and really just dig in.
Yes. And now I'm thinking out loud. I'm like, what would it be like to have 1 in 5 emails essentially actually land? Like, that would be pretty cool. I realized I never introduced myself. So I am Alexine Moudoir, and I'm CEO of Women in Sales. So I'm going to be moderating, but I'm going to have Will and Jen in the hot seat, answering questions, getting us some good advice. And in the interim, what we would ask of all of you who are out there is to please post questions into the Q&A. Don't be shy. This is a really good place to ask us anything, any of your burning questions about prospecting, messaging, cold emailing. We will get to those as we can throughout the event today. But I'd say let's just jump into it, because we got a lot of questions already. And I snuck in a few questions that were in our Slack community as well. So there's lots of things in store for this. So I think a really cool place to start will be acknowledging that the effectiveness of sales messaging has definitely changed in 2023. We are seeing a big shift right now. And I would love to hear from both of you. How has that effectiveness changed? What do you think is contributing to the shift that we're seeing? Jen, maybe we'll start with you, and then we can kick it over to you, Will.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest shifts, and one of the hardest things, frankly, is we came out of a season where there was a lot of demand. There was a lot of money to spend. And we were like gobsmacked in the face by a really hard pivot where people were saying, hey, you know what? I think your product is cool. I think your solution is cool. Maybe you're even in the right neighborhood with the pain, but we've cut all spend. We're making hard choices and hard layoffs. And so I think the abruptness of that shift was what was really, really difficult for a lot of sellers to go through, because the very same messages that worked like 30 days prior, all of a sudden were being ignored, unsubscribed, no longer interested. And so I think in a way, right, I was selling when we went through the 08, 09 kind of economic recession. In a way, this is an opportunity for us all to become better salespeople, because the things we learn in moments like this are the things that separate us even in high times. But I would say that's probably, in my opinion, the biggest shift is messages that work in a cash-rich land do not work when we're all cutting back and trying to do more with like good is good enough.
Yeah. I think one of the things that kind of stands out, right? Like, what's a really concrete example of that? So, we're doing some new data analyses, and one of the things that is standing out is the use of numbers in your cold messaging. So, yeah, I might reach out, Alexine, and I'm like, Lavender can 2x your positive reply rate, or Lavender users get a 20.5% reply rate on average. That's actually going to hurt my chance of getting a response. Um, and so one of the interesting things about that is like it kind of lacks context. I'm just like spouting information at you, and in reality, you're going to spend maybe actually, I usually quote 10 seconds. Chelsea corrected me today. The updated number on this is 9 seconds reading an email. And so, in a 9 second window, just digging some number out, like it just goes right over their head. And in a lot of cases, just like doesn't land. Um, the other thing that I think is really like standing out right now in particular, and a lot of this is due with like and we're part of this in some ways, but like the rise of automation and AI in the sales writing space. Yeah, the shallow observations aren't cutting it anymore, right? Me just coming in and being like, hey, Will, I saw you're hiring, right? Like, that's not going to do it. You have to like multi-layer observations in. I think of it as like having a point of view on the business. Yeah, Jenna, I'm curious, like from your perspective, from like, I don't know, putting on like the challenger hat, right? Like when you think about like having a point of view on the business, I'm curious, like where does that come in for you as well?
Yeah, I think for me, that is what personalization means. Like, personalization to me is not like, hey, I see you like dogs. Yeah, I like dogs. But then if you go into talking about why I should buy your CRM, there's just a disconnect, right? So, observation to me is without saying it, without saying, I did my research and saw that, it's showing that I did my research through the observation I make. So when I was selling, right, one of the things I was always looking for are there pieces of evidence that would suggest that this company loses to status quo, because that was what our solution solved for. So I would try to put on my hat as a seller and think about, if I was carrying a bag for this organization, would I lose to status quo, or would I lose to competitors more than not, right? And then I would try to maybe even pressure test that assumption and call up a couple sellers and say, hey, do you actually, like, why do you lose? And I think when you enter into a decision maker with a highly informed point of view, or at least a thoughtful point of view, we don't always have to be right. And there's ways, and we'll talk about this later, that we can like frame it. So you're not saying, I know you have this problem, but it just shows I'm not hitting send on a message to 1,000 people, of which you are one of them. Like, I am uniquely looking at your business. I'm uniquely curious about how this problem is manifesting in your business. And I think like now, being on the other side of it as a buyer who gets a lot of these messages, I mean, it is so rare. And you're rooting for them. You're like, just give it a little bit of extra thought. It makes a difference.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I see you just joined this company and you have this new role. Buy my stuff, and it's like you're missing like a couple steps of like understanding the business itself that Jen's joining. One of the interesting, back to the data points, right? 2022, there was this big shift away from really like a 125, 150 word email for performance towards a 25 to 50 word email. Like
Mhm.
really short is killing it. And it still is, but the tolerance level for you to extend that out to like say 75 words is starting to relax some. And so that's not an excuse to become more wordy in your writing. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's an excuse for you to layer in an extra observation, some more research, so that when you show up, it's not just, Jen starting a community. It's like recognizing that, like, community is a lot of third party community, not necessarily first party community, and like asking an inquisitive question about that. Um, or looking at like the overall, breadth of what we do in marketing and applying that back into that lens. That's the thing that really is missing right now.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And just to build on that, right? Like what you just said, layering observations. I love the fact that we have data that supports that that is not only okay, it's helping. Like if you look at someone like me, right, there's looking at the person and then looking at the company. Looking at the company, you could say, interesting, Lavender doesn't have its own community, yet you have a community role. Like that's interesting. You could also look at me personally and say, you've never done a community role in a business before. You've been a salesperson. That's interesting, right? So it's like, what are those that's interesting moments that you can really build on so that you show, and instead of just using the word I'm curious, like you lead with an actual curious motion that helps that person see you're not just out there slinging a solution, like you're intently looking at their business.
Yeah. And that's, I think one of the things that you're hitting on, Jen, is this interesting, because like normally we have to like correct people to be like, personalization doesn't equal personal information, right? It's like relevant information of like what actually matters to what they're doing in their day to day. But like what you're hitting on is personal information that can be applied to find relevance, right? So I tell sellers all the time, job history is a fantastic place to go do some research because you can find contrast, right? Like Alexine, like working at like some big enterprise style organizations and then like starting your own thing. There's contrast there, right? Versus like, someone who's always been early stage or someone who has a very like predictable like career path of SDR up to like VP of sales versus, you think about someone like Kyle Coleman, who's like kind of bopped around in some different roles and then found their trajectory, right? Like you can see that and you can see those patterns in their work history.
Yeah.
And it can be interesting ways to sort of think through how they might approach a particular problem that you bring to the table.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Will, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The personalization, I think, is like the most overused buzzword we're starting to see more and more, where like it's lost its true meaning because we've talked about it and like everybody's definition is different. So like for me, like I'll own it. Like 7 years ago, I could send an email and be like, boiler up. And like I would always get an open. I could book meetings like hotcakes off of that. And
Oh
people
yeah.
loved it because at the time, no one had really that much interaction with LinkedIn like they do today. So it did actually seem like I went the extra mile and looked up their information and actually personalized. Whereas today, if I do that, that's like table stakes. I don't even think about that. I get messages all the time. I did a study abroad program through University of Virginia. So people send me, I don't even know what the slogan is, but it's like Wahoo or something. Like once a week I get a message that's like Wahoo. And I'm like, what's Wahoo? I don't even know what that means. I don't
That's
know
the
what.
same. I get
Yeah.
Penn State. We are. People like will literally like be like, we are in all caps. And I'm like, we are not reading this, is what we are doing. Like this is just not getting read.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
oh
yes.
man.
Ryan Walker. I didn't know if were you a Boilermaker too? Okay, we got to talk about that one day. Um, Wisconsin. All right, get out of here. All right. Well, okay. So I think the TLDR is obviously personalization added to relevancy is really like the key. That's where we're like trying to get to with messaging. Short and sweet is still working and being very powerful, which is great. So I think at this point in the conversation, where a really natural point to go to would be really diving into what type of messaging that you're seeing that's working really well right now. Because I actually ran a question in our Slack community several weeks back, and it seemed like a lot of people were hitting like objections, hitting a lot of barriers. A lot of those are just like simply not interested. Some people are kind of, the macroeconomic objection is coming up constantly right now.
Mhm.
And people are just hitting walls left and right. So would love to hear from your team, from either of you, which strategies, which techniques are actually working really well right now.
So there's a couple of things here. So I want to like check the box on the not interested type response because I think that like deserves a call out, which is like if somebody says they're not interested, it's not that like you completely botched it. You just have to respond and get curious. So like lean back on your research and be like, hey, like realize I might have totally missed the mark. Given what I'm seeing here and here, it made me think that this might be a priority. And then, yeah, if you're really like crushing it and you know your buyer well, you can say, yeah, given conversations with, folks in your seat and where you're currently at, am I often thinking that you're probably focused on either priority 1 or priority 2? And what you're doing there is you're just like setting the stage for, okay, now I can start objection handling, start having a conversation. But it all comes back to leaning on that research and being like, no, 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 yeah, it's not a robot here. Like, this isn't just like a paid advertorial. Like, I actually want to have a conversation with you and understand deeper so I can be helpful. Um, I do not see enough sellers doing that.
Mm.
And I would say to add on that, like one, just the motion of replying and showing that you're a human being is definitely a good look. But two, think about what you are saying in that conversation, right? Like I rarely in my inbox, and now I'm not some like bigwig executive, to be fair. But when I look at the cold emails I get, very few of them are even leading with an observation. So it's not like for the majority of them, like, oh, I'm not interested because you picked the wrong problem. My not interested replies, and I don't reply to every cold email, but I've been the person sending cold emails, so I try to respond to them. My not interested, when I look at them, are the people that are like, hey, I saw you just got this job or you just got funding. Here's what we do. And I'm like, right, I'm not interested in what you do because you aren't interested in what we do. You aren't
Mm.
interested in what our problem might be, right? So I think when you get a not interested, it's a good time to step back and say, did I just show up and like talk all about myself? Because that's not interesting, right? Like we don't talk to other human beings
Yeah.
like that, but we do it all the time in the inbox. So I think it's a good moment to have an honest conversations with ourselves to say, what do we actually say and do? And would we ever behave that way in real life?
Ooh, can I tell you both? I got a really good video today. I can't remember if you're out there. We just messaged. If you remember his name, but he sent me a video actually owning the fact that he had reached out like I don't know if it was a few months back or like a year or two back, and he was like, my message like sucked, and he's like, I just wanted to own that. That was like my first few weeks cold emailing, and
Oh,
I
and he
love
was
that.
like, so he's like, I wanted to own that. And also like, I wanted to actually kind of like refocus and reorient your attention back to like the core of my message, which was what I was actually trying to do. And I was like, listen, I can't meet right now, but we're meeting at the end of summer now. And like, I'm going to see if there's an opportunity there. But what a great message. What a great like pattern interrupt. What a cool way to take ownership. So I don't know. As I think about things that are working, I thought that was a really, really cool way of catching my attention and just owning, like, hey, my last message kind of sucked. Like, what's up?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
especially on like LinkedIn, where like, that message that your boss forced you to hit send on, it's still sitting there.
That's the worst. I swear, I have like
Forever
anxiety.
there.
I sent some like emails like years ago, and I have like PTSD where I'm like, they made us send these out of like some campaign, and like we had to do like 60 of them. But like LinkedIn's the worst because it just like follows you forever. So I'll see stuff from like 5 years ago, and I'm like, oh God. But that's a really good way to counteract, a message that might have sucked before. You can kind of turn it around and make it positive.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah. So one of the things too that I think there are a number of answers to this, but I would love to get both of your takes is there is also on the flip side of this messaging that isn't working right now that used to land or we got away with because we had some bad habits as sellers that's just not working anymore. So what are some of those kind of messages that maybe did work in the past, maybe never worked and people aren't aware of? Just anything that's a no-go for you both.
I'll start with the thoughts bump, which like people will still swear by, and I'm like, listen, just because it gets like a 25% like response rate, the other 75% that like did not respond kind of hate you right now, and they most likely are going to hit the spam button, and like they're going to throw you in spam jail, and it's just a bad idea. And there's an easy way to just be a little bit more thoughtful about a thoughts bump, which is just like, hey, given whatever my research is, whatever my reason for showing up in the first place was, I thought this might be interesting. Did you have any feedback? And like you can flip the order of that. Did you have any feedback given my research, right? Like it's not like totally complicated, but you're just personalizing that extra little bit. And it's not just like a one word question mark, thoughtless thoughts.
Oh my
That's my
gosh. Thoughts goes for LinkedIn too. I have like beef with thoughts on LinkedIn too. I don't know if that's just me, but like when people just it'll be like a really good post and then it's just that one word at the end and I'm like, I don't know why it's like very triggering. I'm like, you ruined the whole post for me now. I don't want like the little thoughts at the end. So I have feelings about that too. What about you, Jen? What are you thinking in terms of what is not working or not landing?
Yeah, well, Christine just brought up a good one in the comments. What about leading with data from a third party? I think what the trick is here, and this is something I learned when I came to Lavender, I was making this mistake all the time as a salesperson, is how you position that data. One of the motions that we do with great intentions is we take a data point and then we're like, and you are having this problem. Yet we've never spent a day in their business. We've never spent a day in their life, but we show up sounding really naive, right? I used to do this all the time. I'd be like, your salespeople aren't selling enough because they don't sell like challengers. Like, there's probably 400 reasons that they aren't selling it. It's probably not as simple as one thing. Otherwise, they would have solved it right now. So the tonality of how we position that data is so important to how we land the message. And I would say the thing right now that is not working is being overly assumptive about the problem, overly like condescending in terms of how we position it. Like, you are making a mistake.
Mhm.
And I think that when we look at it, like, we have to one, show up with an empathetic tone. Like, hey, it's hard. Everybody's doing the best they can right now, right? Like, there aren't a lot of people out there intentionally trying to get layoffs. But two, like, positioning it with unsure. So one of the pieces of language that I'll use a lot is like, here's what it looks like from the outside, but I don't work in your four walls. So I'd love to compare this against what you're seeing, right? Or your observations on the business. So you're inviting and standing up a two-way dialogue without coming in and just like being like, yo, your baby is ugly as hell. And I've got all the answers to how to make it better.
Yeah. That's a huge one. I always tell folks to seek correction. Like, people
Mhm.
love to correct people. You are getting the conversation started. You are getting past the hardest conversion point in sales, which is to get them to reply. Like, recognize that third party data is third party. It's not their data, right? It's not true. So it's like, trust but verify kind of ideology of like, hey, like, it looks like you might be using HubSpot, but like, don't know if that's just like a weird tracking pixel that your marketing team tested out once, right?
Mhm.
I get so many emails about us using HubSpot, and I'm like, we don't use HubSpot. We don't use HubSpot. For all the cold emailers out there, spare my inbox. I need to just have like a little section in my inbox
Add
if
it to the
HubSpot is
website.
mentioned.
When prospecting well.
Yeah.
I feel like that'd be a good
Uh,
like a fact section.
yeah, and by the way, the data backs up a lot of what Jen's talking about, right? The unsure tonality in writing, like, still outperforms that like informative, like overly assertive tone.
It makes total sense too, because I do feel like you get messages sometimes. Like, I get these weird messages occasionally where it's like telling me a bunch of stuff about myself, and I'm like, it puts me in a very like defensive position because I'm like, who are you? Like, I don't know you. Why are you telling me who I am? So it
Yeah.
creates this like animosity on your first touch, and then now you're battling against that animosity through your entire buyer journey. Like, you're setting the tone with these initial messages. I think that's like a huge key to remember too. This is going to set the tone for the rest of your buyer journey. So you really want to start off on like a high note, on an inquisitive note, so that you're setting a really good pathway for yourself versus like, that combative energy from step one, because that's going to be a rough, 6 to 12 month sales cycle potentially.
Yeah, and I think it's finding that, like, if you think about a spectrum, right? One is showing up at the inbox, and I still get these messages, and it's wild, being like, "What are your biggest priorities?" And I'm like, "There's the internet. Like, just take a guess, right?" So it's like that's like on one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is like, "I know you. I know exactly what you're about. Like, I'm right. There's nothing you're gonna say," which to your point builds that offense defense. It's like fall somewhere in between. Have an informed hypothesis, do the work, but just don't state it as fact. Like, that's where I think is humans, when we talk to each other, those are the people we tend to gravitate to. We don't tend to gravitate to know-it-alls or people that are just like blindly showing up, like asking questions that can be answered with a 5-minute search.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a good question. Would you two mind if we take a small detour?
It depends on the
Detour.
question. If it's hard, Will
Well,
doesn't mind at all.
yeah, it's a surprise. It's about messaging. Jonathan Allerton, which is he's the co-founder of Work Life and is also putting on a really cool event in Fiji next year, where I will be making my Fiji reappearance. He asks, can you speak to how messaging might differ when balancing between just starting a conversation versus needing to generate immediate pipeline? I'm going to post it. Oh, I can share it on the stage.
Oh,
Perfect.
Did that work? Oh, cool.
Yeah, I can see it.
And it's purple.
Look at that. On brand.
good. Do you want to take it or do you want me to take it, Will?
Yeah, so I have my point of view on this. So Jonathan, starting a conversation and generating immediate pipeline should actually be the same thing. It's not it's an and. If you're showing up with a compelling point of view, it should generate deals that close faster because you're showing up with a very targeted use case and understanding of exactly where your product's going to fit in and the priorities it's going to solve for. Whereas what happens usually is somebody shows up, spouts like 7,000 features, and then there's this weird translation moment where in the buyer's head, they have an idea of how the product's going to be used, and like you have no idea. And so you have to go through this awkward extra step of like sussing that out. And then like usually half the time the seller fails to actually suss it out at all anyways. So that's my thought is like good prospecting actually accelerates pipeline and generates immediate pipeline. Jim, what's your thought?
This is why I love working for Will. So I think like if you look at the data, I don't know where it came from, but it's just that old saying, like between 3 and 5% of your market is shopping, right? Use intent-based triggers to find those 3 to 5%, but recognize for the other 95 to 97%, you are not going to get immediate pipeline, right? And doing the things in pursuit of trying to just turn everybody into a buyer are going to be the very things that push buyers away. This is a mistake I made all of the time. We have to give people a reason to reconsider that what they're doing is good enough. And that's going to probably take a little bit of time, right? So one of the big lessons, if I look back at all the mistakes I made as a salesperson that I would love to go back and correct, is when I operated out of pursuit of moving fast, it almost always took me longer. If I operated out of pursuit of doing the right things, like the process itself probably looked longer on paper, but I moved through it faster. I just posted about this today. Like when we get so eager to call a decision maker and we don't actually take the time to say, is this company even having the problem that I'm hypothesizing that they have? Like, yeah, we might be able to connect with the decision maker fast, but we might also then miss that swing. And then to get another swing is really, really hard. So I think in general, like if we slow down and do the right things, we end up getting what we want, which is pipeline, instead of just trying to do things quickly to move through it.
Okay, awesome. We have one other question from Amber Kidd, who is a member of the Women in Sales community, and she is actually starting her new role. She just accepted an offer, so she's starting. I think it's next week, Amber. So super excited for her. But she asks, do you feel like in a sequence, the first touch should be a cold email or a cold call? Which I know this is polarizing. So I feel like this is a layup too for like for the
Yeah, I mean, oh man, it's one of those things where it depends on the metrics of the business, right? So like if you know your company has a really high conversion rate, if you get somebody to answer the phone, then like you should pick up the phone and call them, right? Like, because if that's like your best shot at like getting them, and if they answer, you just immediately pull them out of the sequence and they don't have to go through the entirety of it. Versus like if cold email is really effective for you, say you reach out to like marketers and marketers don't answer the phone as often as sales leaders, in which case like maybe that cost, like those call steps happen later in the series, knowing that you're going to have a higher conversion rate on email, right? So like our emails convert, I think like Mike right now is looking at like a 40% positive reply rate. So like you're looking at that and you're like, okay, 40%, like he should just shoot an email, not pick up the phone. But that's just like, you got to look at like the math of the business on it.
Yeah, and I think even though we're a cold email company, like, we are not in the camp of, like, "Don't make cold calls, cold calling is dead." Like, we couldn't be farther from that, right? You really don't wanna pick one single lane because every buyer is a little bit different, and you're just immediately wiping out some people that don't read cold me emails or don't take cold calls. For me as a salesperson, it just always helped me organize my thoughts if I wrote the email first. Like, I would look at what I was writing and be like, "Ooh, this is a really bad why them, why now message. I need to tighten it up." And it increased my confidence when I did pick up the phone to feel really confident that I knew my message was going to land versus winging it. So I totally agree with Will. Like, look at your business's metrics and think about what makes you feel confident, because confidence at the end of the day is like a big, big difference maker.
Jen, I love that point. The point about like organizing your thoughts before you ever pick up the phone, right? And writing is a great way to clarify your thinking. So with that, email could be the best way to go. But it just depends.
Amazing. Yeah. I think, at least from my experience, 10 years of enterprise selling, I have always stood behind a multi-channel approach. And so anybody that tells me that any channel's dead, I just put that to the wayside. There are all these channels. Listen, I had someone tell me like a couple of years ago, it's my worst nightmare, but he used cold FaceTime and he was like booking meetings from it, like hotcakes. And I was like, I would absolutely never and nor will I even try it because it's way too intrusive for me and whatever, but it was working for him. So I have no business telling people like where they should or shouldn't do their prospecting. Whatever channel is working for you. If you're ready to deal with people yelling at you on FaceTime, that's cool too. But yeah, it's
I'm just
just
like, what was this like script? Like, what did he say when like somebody picked up the phone? Like, who is this?
I just remember he was like a really, I don't know how to describe this, like a very like salesy guy, like a Chicago salesy guy. Like Jed, you
Yeah.
would know that. It's just like, so he's just like, Bob, what's up? It's like 5 p.m. I see you walking out the door. So I'm giving you like, it's go time. It was just like that kind of thing. So I'm like,
It was
whatever.
Ryan. Yeah.
My worst nightmare. It was Ryan Walker. It was, yeah. But okay, cool. Well, so anyways, all that to say, try the different channels. Maybe not FaceTime, don't tell the guy, but but I think one other place I want us to hit, even just briefly, some of this might be second nature for the two of you, but I think for other folks out there, they might not know what pitfalls to avoid. So I know, like, Will, you talk about this a lot, like how emails are getting like spammed automatically. You've talked about like domains before. Can you talk at like a more granular level about those types of pitfalls that people might not be aware of? Because I certainly wouldn't have known that a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I feel like the deliverability has become like the boogeyman of sales right now, where like nobody knows exactly where it is. It's somewhere under the bed and like it might come get you. And like, I think one of the things we have to recognize is like, yes, there's technical things that need to be correct. Like there's, we set up like a really simple, I wish I had set up the email for this, but like there's really simple like tests you can run on your domain that are like publicly available tools like MX Toolbox. Wish I had these like top of mind. There you go. Lavender at email.webhook.site. That'll actually literally shoot you a like report based off of your domain. And you'll see like, okay, technically these are all the things I'm doing right. These are all the things I'm doing wrong. The way that I tell folks to really like track this stuff outside of that is like monitor your open tracking. Is it going like down? Is it plummeting? That's usually a sign that you've got a deliverability issue. I certainly don't live and die by like open tracking. Like I'm not like, oh, Alexine opened my email. Time to pick up the phone. Because like in reality, you might use Apple Mail and it just like opens off on some odd server somewhere. So like all that to be said, like the most important thing in the deliverability conversation that doesn't get half as much attention as it should is, are people like responding and are they happy with the messaging that you're putting in front of them? Because like even if they are responding and there's a high group of people that are complaining, you're still in spam jail, right? But if like I'm shooting thoughtful emails out the door that people are replying to at least above like a 10% reply rate, you're in a safe spot. I think that's really where I sort of stick my flag in the ground on this one. It's a hill I'll die on. Is like deliverability is mostly a messaging problem, not any other issue.
Hot take. I like it. I don't know if that's a hot take. It's like yeah, I like it.
Yeah. If you send spam, you'll end up in spam.
Wow, there it is. That's the line for this whole event. If you send spam, that summarizes this entire event. Jen, anything you would add in terms of like really on like more of that granular level, like as people are sending anything that Will didn't cover that you'd want to add before we go to the next question?
I think there's just some to Will's point about like the message itself. There are some things that maybe worked a while ago that are no longer as effective that I would probably stay away from. So things that are just like passive aggressive in tone. I guess this is not a priority. I guess growth is not a priority for you. Like these are things that are generally really, really not helpful to building a good relationship with your buyer. So check your tonality of what you're saying. The other thing I think would be we've all, I think, in pursuit of trying to create observations, start leading our emails with, I noticed that, I read that, I saw that, right? And what we tend to forget is that eats up the preview text of what that buyer sees. So I posted the other day, and Will's done this too, a screenshot of my inbox which shows subject line and preview text. And in every single one of these emails, it started with the word I. And I saw that. I hope you're doing well. I hope the funding has been awesome for you. Like, I hope. And then I never actually, from the preview, could see what the content of the message was. Versus if someone said, Will Allred posted about, I'd be like, I hope he didn't post something bad about me. Not that he would, because he's a great boss, but like that would be curiosity. So we also have to consider the preview text is just as important as that subject line. So make sure you're not wasting it on like, I hope you're wells and I did this research, because you can just get to the point faster.
And the simple alternatives for the I saw is something like, given that.
Oh, wait, now I can't hear anybody. What is going on?
We can hear you.
Goodbye, Jen.
I was just gonna say, like a classic like switch up on I saw or I noticed you would just be like, given your, with your, or as you da 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 with your new da da da, right? It's more you focused, less me focused.
Yeah, and that Jen it gives all of us a good exercise of actually going through our emails and looking at what we've been sent. And I think once we do, we'll probably see some of these same patterns. So it's a really good way. And honestly, I like getting cold emails. I'm probably putting myself on more lists, but I like looking at the messaging that's going out. I like seeing what is attracting my attention and what's stopping me, because I'm someone who does look at every single email, but I'm very quick to like make moves. I'm either responding or I'm not. I'm moving on to the next, or I'm working on it. Like I just have to like move through it really fast. And so anything that stops me in my tracks gives me a lot of really good ideas of what I want to do prospecting wise. So not only should you kind of cross-reference your own inbox, but also see what kind of messaging resonates and lands with you so that you can kind of replicate some of those same techniques as a seller yourself. Yeah. We have more questions in Q&A. They're coming in hot. We got a lot of questions. So thank you all for posting questions. Sometimes people are shy. Okay, so, oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. Okay, so here's one. Kalia Sanders asks, Alexine mentioned pattern interrupt and gave the example of the video message. I wanted to know Jen and Will's perspective/thoughts on other great examples of pattern interrupting when prospecting.
Pattern interrupting when prospecting. Some things that really, if you think about the way I'm going through my inbox as a buyer, I'm looking for names I recognize, threads I recognize, conversations that I'm expecting, right? It's the classic, like I pick up the phone and I'm like, I was actually waiting for somebody else to call me, right? Um, and with that, like name dropping is a killer pattern interrupt from within the organization. And you run the risk of like, yeah, upsetting, turning over the apple cart of like that other person being like, I didn't tell you to reach out to that person. But I think if you approach the messaging in a kind, empathetic, as we were talking about earlier, soft way, you can kind of set yourself up in a if you say like, hey, I was talking with Jen and she mentioned XYZ, right? Like I'm going to open that email 100% of the time. The other one that stood out to me was I don't know if any of y'all follow Darren McKee. He's like ultimate golden retriever energy of a human being.
True.
he, he was showcasing to me native video in LinkedIn. And what he does is he like goes outside and walks around the house with his little phone, and just like records the video. And he's not trying to like make it polished or anything. It's like pure like TikTok mentality of like that raw, authentic footage. And I was like, oh, this makes total sense. I would 100% stop in my tracks to be like, all right, what that guy videoed me about.
Yeah, I love both of those. I think for me, I'll share 2 examples that actually happened to me that totally caught me, but was the same theme, which is give with no ask, right? When I see an email, to Will's point, from someone I don't recognize, I'm going to assume it's a newsletter of some sort or it's a cold email. And when I open it up, I'm just waiting to be punched with like, do you have 15 minutes? And so when I see an email that actually doesn't do that and hypothesizes a problem I might have, and then gives me something that might be helpful to figuring out that problem, immediately I'm like, well, all the warm and fuzzies, all the butterflies, right? Because it's so rare. So when I started, there was a guy that had reached out to me who said, I saw you started over community. I did a quick search, didn't see that Lavender had a community. Maybe I missed it. That's unsure tonality. But if you are responsible for building one, I thought this was really helpful. This was a really helpful guide, sharing with you in the hopes that you find it helpful too. And literally the dude just gave me like the most helpful breakdown of how to like start a community and didn't ask for everything. Like when we as humans receive a gift, our natural desire is to want to be appreciative and to show gratitude, right? Like when someone shows up and wants to take from us, we put our walls up. And so again, it just goes back to kind of being more human in the inbox. That was a really good one. And then Will Taylor at I forget what they are called now, maybe Partner Hacker. He did the same thing. Saw you have partnerships as part of your responsibility. Thought it might be helpful just to share some things that I learned as well. And so it's much less about like, let me sell you my thing and much more about let me help you learn. That's where buyers can really use the help.
Awesome. So many good options. Yeah. I remember an old one from Morgan Ingram too, for like when you're on calls as well. Like when they would say like, I'm going into a meeting, you'd be like, I'm stepping into a meeting too. And then it would just like kind of catch people off guard and they'd actually like take the conversation because they were like, what? And he's like, okay, we're both on the way to the meeting. And that one always cracks me up too. So anything about pattern interrupt, think about something that's, again, like Jen said, like going to stop them in their tracks, like kind of catch them off guard. And it doesn't have to be like the cold calling one if that's not your style. It can be these other approaches. So pattern
I think
interrupt,
it's hilarious.
I love it. I loved that one. I remember it from
me too.
I'm walking to a meeting too, and they're like, "What?" So I love stuff like that. I think it's hilarious, but and it's probably true half the time. So it's like here is one more. Again, this could be somewhat of a layup for our friends at Lavender here, but I'm going to ask it just in case. What are your go-to resources when personalizing emails? And this kind of goes hand in hand with another question that we got that we probably won't have time to get to both, but it was asking about kind of like data sources or how you look for what you want to personalize your emails with. So we'll kind of marshmallow those together.
Oh man, I want to make it challenging and be like, what's the number one resource? And if I have to pick one, I'm gonna go with the job board, time and time again, because you get tech stack information, you get daily responsibilities of things that either they're trying to offload or the person that you're trying to reach out to does. You learn like corporate priority of like what they're focused on, what they're like investing in. So for me, that's like a go-to of all go-tos. I mentioned earlier, like the contrast in career and stuff, I think that's another great one. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
So this is the company's job board? Like, you're going to their careers page and just looking through, like, their open requisitions, is that correct?
Mhm.
Mm, I like it.
And of course, we have that in Lavender for the reason of I like it. So,
That's why you found a company. You get to put stuff in your product you like. Um, no, I that one is such a good one, such a good one. It really helps you, particularly in industries, like sometimes when we're selling to sales, SDR can mean very different things to very different businesses. Like we could assume they handle inbound, but if you read the job description, it could completely disprove that. So it prevents you from making an assumption that then makes you irrelevant. Mine would probably be I'm such a nerd for this, but I love listening to, or probably more honestly, reading transcripts of podcasts that the CEO was on or the founder, because I think then you can find those little tiny little nuggets that are like, I definitely know you, right? Like you are not part of some big campaign. So that would be my second one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep adding some. So if you're going enterprise, obviously the 10K report, like what the heck is
Mhm.
priority? And then if you're going transactional SMB, there's not a job board, there's no 10K, and so what the heck do you look at? Like LinkedIn Insights page is money. You can see like growth trajectory of like who they're hiring, where they're hiring, backgrounds of folks that they're hiring, but you also can just go to their website. Like, is pricing available? Do you have to book a demo, right? You can kind of get a feel for how they're going to market. Can I just like go to their website and sign up now? It's probably a more marketing led organization. Who are they even targeting? Like, what even is the thing that they sell? Like, half the time, emails, like, I swear they just don't even know what we do. And of course, they don't. They didn't personalize it. And so it's just me in the list of many versus like somebody who at least has a sense for what we do can at least bring that to the table. I think that's another aspect when you're going down market.
Mhm. Yeah. I like the activity feed as well. I know there's been like some polarizing posts on social recently about like acknowledging like what people like or like what they like people they follow, things like that. I still find if you could do this in the right way, and there is a right way to do it, that it's a very effective method. So I think if you can actually share something that's really genuine and say like, hey, I just saw you shared something about this, here's like my favorite takeaway from what you posted, or like here's something, and like actually show that you read it and put some time into it, and or just comment on it so that you're creating that line of communication in that way so that when they see your name again it becomes really relevant. I'm thinking about years ago when I used to prospect into a lot of Fortune 100 companies. I was really the only person on the team at the time who would comment on a lot of our prospects' posts. And I wouldn't like email them right away. I wasn't trying to like book a meeting right away. I would try to cold call periodically, but I was commenting and I started to show up all over the place. And then I started to form connections with these people. And then all of a sudden, when I was connecting to new people, they were like, wow, we have like 50, 75, 200 mutual connections. You must have some kind of tie to my field and my peers. And so you start to create the collaboration that way. But a lot of it was very genuine and just commenting on things as I saw them without any kind of ask or sell, similar to what Jen was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point on the, calling out there, commenting on a post, I think the issue in messaging, like the one that went viral, is that it became a excuse to like throw your product in their face
Mm-hmm.
versus like, I think the example was like a Chris Walker post, right? Instead of like just throwing your product out there, being like, curious, like, are you like acting on what he's talking about? Like, just try to start a conversation about it, right? I actually don't know what the actual post was, right? But like, I don't know, say you're commenting on like one of my posts and like somebody's reaching out to you, right? Like, hopefully they're not like, buy my cold email product, right? Like, hopefully they're, hey, like, have you tried some of those frameworks? Are they working for you? Curious, like, how are you putting that into action? Starting a conversation, like, social is not a, like, I always tell people the inbox is a to-do list where I'm trying to check through my priorities and get stuff done. That's not really social, right? I'm not giving project updates to people via LinkedIn DMs. That inbox is a mess. There's no way. And so people have to recognize it's like you're going to get like short little conversational snippets that happen over a period of time. And like, it's a water cooler. It's a place for like back and forth dialogue.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we're nearing the end. I think we're gonna skip one question that we had because we just had too much good stuff. But I would love for us to end this event talking a little bit about Lavender, how folks can use Lavender, how they can actually access Lavender if they haven't used Lavender before. I'm gonna see how many times I can use Lavender in a sentence. But one or both of you talk a little bit about where the application of Lavender is within prospecting and kind of deep dive into how sellers who are new to you can actually leverage your technology.
Sure. Jen, you want me to take this one?
It's up to you. Go for it.
You were so eager earlier. I was giving you some crap. Now, if you think about the process of writing an email, there's really 4 things that have to happen. You've got to research. You're really searching for context, context for why you're showing up, context for your point of view. That's one piece. And so we have research tools that bring in information on the individual, the company they work for. The next piece is the creation of content. And so we can actually take that research and turn it into conversation starting prompts. We can generate an entire message for you if you like. I'm still a fan of keeping the seller in the front seat and the AI in the back seat, but we can help you create that content. Then you have to edit the content. And so we're probably most known for our score, where we're stacking your email up against almost 100 million at this point. And we're giving you live feedback on what it means to write a better email and improving your chance of getting a response. And then the last piece is testing and iteration and learning what actually works, right? So we have a dashboard where you can see why these things are working, what's working, and all that stuff gets fed right back into the assistant. So when you're editing, it's real time.
And one thing I would just add, like, we often are thought of for prospecting, right? And it's a fabulous use case. Obviously, everybody's under pressure to book more meetings. But as someone who found Lavender as an AE before I came here, there are so many use cases that are often afterthoughts, right? Like if I think about I do a first call and then I'm trying to get that person to bring in a buying group, my emails were like this. Like it was I was writing these novels because I wanted to show how much I was listening, right? And so tightening that up. Or on LinkedIn, when I do a text-based post, like I put it in Lavender and I'm like, could I actually kill a bunch of big words and things that don't mean anything? And so if we think about writing in sales today, there are just so many places where we are not present and we need our writing to be our representative. And so think about all those little moments, our proposals, our cover letters, all these things are opportunities for us to be clearer and sharper about our message. Because if we think about like where deals go to die, a lot of times it's bad communication.
And on the thought of different use cases, Dominique Brooks just commented, love Lavender, currently using it for my job hunt and pilot it at my last company. And we have Katie Penner, our good friend Katie Penner, who said obsessed with Lavender, all caps. And she also said, and I love this, she said, we had an AE who tried to negotiate a Lavender license as part of the hiring contract. Thankfully, we already had it. So I love that. I think that's cool. I'm like, I'm the queen of that. I'm like, let me just make a list of my tech stack and try to negotiate it in an hour in a job interview. So props to that rep. I like that.
Yeah. And for the job seeking, like we offer the product for free if you're on the job hunt. So yeah. Who's it? Dominique. Dominique, if you're not on like a free extension for it for the job seeking, like reach out to us. We are happy to make that happen. And for anyone else as well who's just listening in.
I put that in the chat, the link to get your job seeker access. So if you need it, there's your steps. You can do it today.
Yes. Okay, cool. And very last, Corey Brubaker did say that on your website, someone got a tattoo of Lavender. And is that Will? Was that Will that did that? One of the
No,
ones?
it's Sims. If you scroll down to the bottom of the site, there's a link to the to the post.
Oh God, okay.
It was a customer. I couldn't believe it. That happened right after it came on. I was like, what did I just join? This is weird. But in the very, very best of ways.
Jen, if
It's a
I see you
cult.
get a tattoo, I'm gonna come
My
grab some.
mother would kill me and never no.
Little lavender flower teardrops.
So, yeah, I mean, this is the end of our time. Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you all for attending and being part of this conversation. Maybe we'll all get matching tattoos after this, who knows? But Will, Jen, thank you so much for being here. And if you haven't yet, make sure to check out Lavender. Join us on Women in Sales over at the Slack channel so you can get more of these types of events. And happy selling, everyone.
Thank
Love it.
you.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Take care.